Australian True Crime is a proudly independent podcast produced by us, with no corporate or network overlords policing our content. Unfortunately, that means we get none of their cash either. If ongoing payments aren't for you, you can now make a one-off contribution of any amount you wish simply by clicking the link in the show notes. You'll know which one.
Welcome to another episode of Ask Tomorrow. I'm your host, Tomorrow. Better sleep makes for a better me, and Casper's Cooling Collection has everything hot sleepers need to keep cool all night long, like the Wave Hybrid Snow Mattress for over 12 hours of cooler sleep. Okay, next caller.
Hi, Tomorrow. I need to break up with my boyfriend. Any suggestions?
Get him a breathable mattress protector. It helps hot sleepers stay cool.
I think I'll just go with flowers.
Yeah, none of my exes appreciated the mattress protector either. Casper, love your tomorrow.
The producers of this podcast recognise the traditional owners of the land on which it's recorded. They pay respect to the Aboriginal elders past, present and those emerging.
This episode of Australian True Crime is about online child exploitation, and it includes some disturbing content right from the beginning. So please take a moment now to think about who's listening and whether or not it's appropriate. With that said, it's always a good idea to speak to children of all ages about online predators. The Australian E-Safety Commission surveyed frontline specialist law enforcement professionals from around the world in early 2021, and their research found that there have been marked increases in both online risk-taking by minors and in live streaming of abuse material since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. If you would like to talk to someone about online exploitation, you can call Crime Stoppers on 1800 333 000 or go to crimestoppers.com.au.
Lux in some ways stands out and in some ways just like the other darknet pedophiles that I spoke to. He was different, I think, in that he was singularly hated by other pedophiles. Like entire communities of other pedophiles really despised Lux because he promoted hurtcore, which is a genre within a genre, right? It's a genre of child pornography in which the idea is that the kid is getting hurt and hit and abused beyond the normal level of abuse of child pornography. And that is something that other pedophiles hate. It's funny to call them that, but the mainstream pedophiles basically think of this as abhorrent because as part of the justification of their actions, they see themselves as part of child love. While that requires its own twisted sense of justification, it's another level to say that the kid wants to be hit.
That's journalist Patrick O'Neill, who specialises in reporting on the dark web. Dark web is a term we all throw around these days, but only because of people like Patrick O'Neill and our guest, Australian journalist Eileen Ormsby, who literally wrote the book. In fact, she's written 7 books about the dark web, but it was her first book, Silk Road, about the so-called eBay of hard drugs, that began the exposure of the darkest corners of the internet to the world. A year after Silk Road's release, Eileen sat in a courtroom looking at a man who was once the internet's most wanted and elusive trafficker of violent child abuse material. His true identity was shocking. We'll talk about that a little bit later, and the methods used by international law enforcement agencies to shut down operations like his. But first, we begin with some basics.
I wanted to become a fiction writer, a chick lit writer, when I started at RMIT. But then one of the classes I was doing was journalism, and they said, try pitching a feature to some newspapers. That was in 2012, and I'd heard about Silk Road, which was the first of the major darknet markets, the point-and-click drugs markets. And I've always been a drug law reform advocate, so I'm very against the war on drugs. I believe that prohibition is actually killing more people than it's saving, and I think it should be legalised and regulated and people be educated about it, just, the way we do with other things. And so when Silk Road came along, it was like this new era of drug dealing that sort of had safety at the forefront of it. And I had friends that were using it, and, they showed it to me, and it was like, oh, wow, this is, amazing. It's like nothing I've ever seen before. And so I pitched that to The Age as a story. And the editor got back to me and said, oh, we'll run this as a feature. And it took up a full page. So my very first article in print was a full page in The Age. And after that, the editor came to me and said, oh, have you got any other stories on this dark web? We've never heard about it. And so I gave them another story on the dark web. And from then on, I became Fairfax's go-to journalist for dark web stories. So that just led me deeper and deeper into the dark web, well beyond Silk Road and into everything else that surrounded it. And I also found it really fascinating. The original Silk Road was much more than a place to buy and sell drugs. It was this massive community of people that believed that they were in this revolution. It came out a bit further down the track that it wasn't quite the peaceful revolution that everybody thought and dreamed it was. But at the time, it was like this utopia for people. And there was a lot of interesting people to talk to about that. And, I enjoyed my time in the dark web, especially on the Silk Road forums, and becoming part of it and understanding it right from the ground roots and why people were involved with it, why the sellers were there, why the people that own the markets were taking that sort of risk, and why the buyers liked it.
I was talking to Ginger Gorman a few weeks ago about trolling online. Specifically, we were talking about that leading into terrorism. And we were talking about the idea that initially these things always seem to start with this utopian idea of the internet and online forums as a positive place of everyone having a voice. And then they seem to devolve into places of horror. Is that your experience?
Less so on the dark web than on the clear web.
Really?
Yeah, I think some of those uncensored forums on the clear web just devolve into absolute rubbish, garbage very, very quickly. I'm not a big one for censorship, but you can't have these forums, big forums, without a moderator or, a certain amount of moderation going on. And the dark web was quite heavily moderated in a lot of ways, even though it was this place where anything goes. A lot of the forums were still quite heavily moderated, and people really did, live and die by their reputations under their usernames, even though they're anonymous. Their usernames, the reputation behind those usernames was everything, because that's the only thing you've got when you're on the dark web.
Yeah, okay. So how did Silk Road work, by the way? My understanding is that I downloaded Tor. I always think, and I've never done it, but somehow, I download a thing called Tor. That's a search engine, I think. And then through that, I get onto the dark web. I think I click on it and it takes me to this place called the dark web. And then I can open Silk Road and then I say, I'll have some heroin, please. And then I pay for it with Bitcoin and then it sends it to me in the post. Is that how it works?
It's kind of, generally speaking, yeah. It's
terrific.
Not unlike that. So it is. So the dark web is just really the colloquial name that we give to all of these websites that can only be accessed using something like Tor. So, and the way you know that you've got a dark web address rather than a regular address is, instead of your usual signifiers like .com, .org, .net, it says .onion on the end. And if you were to try to put that into your regular browser, into your Chrome or your Safari or whatever, it just comes up as page not found, does not exist. If you download Tor, that opens up another browser, looks exactly like your regular browsers, so it's actually a browser, not a search engine. And then you put that address in there, and all of a sudden it can find that address.
Okay.
So you have to know the exact address of the place that you're looking for.
Okay. But I feel like the police will know. I feel like if I try and download Tor even, I feel like there'll be a knock at my door in 15 minutes and the cops will be there saying, why? What do you want Tor for? What are you up to, lady? Won't they?
Well, Tor's completely legal. Tor was actually developed by the US military, or in conjunction with the US military, and it was designed to look after military secrets and CIA secrets, and designed to protect whistleblowers. So it's actually just a protection, a privacy protection tool, just like many other things are. And it is used for those things. It's used for whistleblowers. the CIA has a site on the dark web. The Guardian has a site on the dark web so that you can upload documents without any way of that being traced back to you. So for whistleblowers, and all the big news sites have a dark web presence. So it's not just drugs and guns and that sort of thing. There are legitimate uses for it. And some people just use it for browsing. So it is just a browser, and the difference with it is it's not tracking everything you do. There are no cookies looking at what you've been to before and what you're going to, and no advertisers are following you around Tor. So you can actually browse without leaving that digital footprint that you're always leaving when you're on your regular web.
Can I browse regular sites using Tor if I just want to use it for that purpose? I just don't want to be tracked.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Oh.
It's a bit of a pain in the ass because, a lot of things we do for convenience. So, you're always logged into your favourite sites and all that, and, they remember your passwords and everything, whereas that never happens on Tor. So when you're browsing, it's like you're a brand new first-time user every single time. So it can be a bit slow, and it is slower in general than your normal browsers anyway. So it's a bit like going back to dial-up days. If you remember what that was like, which was fine back in dial-up days, but now that we're used to what we're used to, it's agonisingly slow. But it can certainly be used. Yeah, if you want to do just regular browsing, Googles for things that you don't want left on your computer or whatever, you can do that using Tor.
So much of our usage is accepting the inconvenience of our movements being traced for the convenience of laziness, of the fact that the websites know our passwords, so I don't have to go through the hassle of typing in those 8 letters or whatever it is, or remembering all those passwords. And for that convenience, I'm giving up a lot of my privacy and I'm letting people track me. My 11-year-old daughter even said to me, when there was the conspiracy theory about the COVID vaccine implanting microchips into our bodies or whatever, and my 11-year-old daughter said, oh, for Christ's sake, they're all being tracked with their phones. They're walking around carrying tracking devices.
Every single thing that they do is being tracked as long as they got that phone in their hand.
And none of us reads the terms and conditions of anything, ever.
No, I read somewhere that in order to read all of the terms and conditions that you click I agree to, you'd have to be literally reading for something like 6 months a year.
Yeah. The other thing I found really interesting, I was reading your book, The Darkest Web, and I think a point that you're making, or certainly a point that I took away from that book, was an idea that perhaps there are some sort of cliched old ideas that weren't real, that were actually fiction, but then have become real because of the internet. Ideas like snuff films, for example. As I was reading, I felt like you were saying, listen, was that real or was it fiction until the internet? And then people made it real.
Yeah, well, what's happened with the use of the internet is more things are being captured on video than ever before. But the old myth of the snuff film was, there was directors and producers and camera people and sound people, and they was there, and the murder of the person involved was only for the film, and then the film got distributed around for money. That's still not a thing that has ever been. There's never been a verified snuff film. However, it is not real in the way that we think about it, and it's usually a pornographic thing with, as you say, a young woman. It is real when it comes to children.
So you mean it has always been real in that way?
No, I don't think it's always been real. It is because, and one of the things especially the dark web has done, it has its good uses, but then it has its really, really, really bad uses. And one of the things it's done is because of the way the dark web operates, so you've got things like your drug markets, and they are designed to be found. They don't want to be hidden away. They want customers. So, they advertise and they're out there, and anyone can go and find where you can go and buy drugs online. On the dark web. So in the old days, before the dark web, these sorts of things had to be really clandestine. So you had to know somebody, or you had to know exactly where to go to find these things, and it wasn't openly advertised to everybody, because if they put up a link of where to go and find this shop, then the IP would be traced and it would be shut down immediately. The dark web gets around that. So, the IP can't be traced, so they can advertise out there, which is one thing for drugs. It's a completely different thing when the child predator forums are doing the exact same thing. And so all of a sudden, these people that had these predilections that they could never tell anybody, they had to keep completely within themselves, they've got a community now that they can go and find. So once again, the dark web can advertise. This is where you come if you want to talk to child predators that like to look at naked children or worse. And they have, different levels of those sorts of things in there. So it has created this place where these communities can come together and share all their materials. And the sharing of their materials, they've been able to monetize it as well. Although unlike the drugs is all about money. Unlike the drugs, the actual child predator forums are more about a sharing economy. So the way that people get access to higher levels of these sites, these child predator sites, is by uploading new material. And so you can either get there by uploading new material or paying money, and that's where there's now a commerce side to it as well. And so people are producing videos for the money, and the videos do go beyond what you might think as regular child porn, which is a horrible thing to say, but it's worse than that.
Video called Daisy's Destruction, and its place in a famous bust of a pedophile ring. And that ring was sort of, there was a pivotal character in that ring who was actually based in Melbourne, and this guy was interesting for a lot of reasons. He was interesting because he had created a persona for himself that was very different to his real life. The persona that he created sort of meant that he became more and more grandiose in the material that he was encouraging people to submit online, and it sort of culminated in this terrible film, Daisy's Destruction. But you sort of also make the point that a number of people involved talked about the fact that they didn't have pedophilic predilections earlier in their lives, that they wandered into this community and then, became involved in creating the content. Sorry, we're back. We dropped out for a second. And then they became involved in creating the content. And we've spoken before to specialists in the area who say that, of child offenders, a very small percentage are actually pedophiles in the clinical sense. Did you find that?
There's a whole range of them, and a lot of the pedophiles, they consider themselves child lovers, and they hate the hurt-core side of it. They hate the torture and the horrible worst side of it just as much as anybody hates. It's got a name. It's called hurt-core, yeah. And it is a very tiny subset of an already gross collection of people. It's a very tiny subset of those people that are into that. Yeah, the person you were talking about, Lux, who owned what was considered the most heinous site ever to exist at the time, Hurt to the Core, he did not, or he seemed to not have any pedophilic tendencies, and he was never a contact offender. There was absolutely no evidence that he was a contact offender at any time. What he did have was the need for people to look up to him and to think that he was someone special. And, he couldn't do that in any regular way. The only way he could do that was providing people with the most extreme videos, the most extreme material of anybody on the dark web. So most of the people on the dark web, hated him and reviled him, but there was this small subset that just thought he was like a god, and that's what he really needed.
Wow, so he just found this community, stumbled upon this community where that was possible.
Pretty much, yeah.
That's the other thing. I assume, and I think a lot of people do, that the dark web is all about child porn, just all about it. How much of it really is dedicated to child porn? And I assume that if I click on the dark web, I'm going to accidentally see child porn immediately.
No, probably not, unless you're looking for it. That said, so it's a large amount of it is child porn. It's drugs, hacking and child porn. And that's pretty much the commerce side of the dark web. If you go on the dark web, generally you've got an address that you want to go to, so you already know where you're going to, but there are entry points. So there's an address that you go to, and then that's got a whole bunch of links of different places to go. Now, normally it will be very clear. It's telegraphed exactly what you are going to look at. And so you'd have to click on that link in order to go there. Sometimes something will have a thumbnail and you think, oh, that looks dodgy. Definitely not clicking that link. But it's unlikely that you will just stumble on it. But there are people that go down the rabbit hole, and there are things like they call like a search engine, but it's like what they call a crawler, which just picks up all the new dark web sites as they come on. And sometimes they don't have details next to them of what they are. They're just like a link. And dark web links are not like silkroad.onion. They are this long string of letters and characters that don't make any sense. So they don't really signify what's behind them. So unless they have a little thing underneath that says what it is, if you're the sort of person that's going to go and click out of curiosity, then yes, you will definitely stumble across child porn. But by the other token of that, you will stumble across the front page of a site, but then you have to sign up and go in to get to, the really deep stuff. So, you're taking a positive action in order to actually access the worst of the worst. But sometimes they will have these photos on their front page. So, when I'm taking people through it, I'm always like, do not click on anything that looks like this. Don't click on anything that says take me to a random site, any of those sorts of things. You can definitely be on there and completely avoid it. Like, I haven't seen any child porn since probably when I first started on the dark web, because I know how to avoid it. Okay,
so you have, but not not easily and not for a long time. And
no, and when I say I have, it's like it's been sort of like I say, that thumbnail out of the corner of your eye where you say I'm not going there. That's not something I want to see.
How common do you think it is, though, that people do wander on there and have a quick look out of curiosity?
Oh, I have no doubt that people do that. If you go onto the Reddit forums of like the deep web, dark web Reddit forums, there's a whole lot of people that say, oh, I was curious and I clicked something and then I'm never going to do that again. It was the worst thing. I've cleaned my computer and I'm waiting for the FBI to bust my door down. So I think that does happen. Certainly the number of people that were seeking out Daisy's destruction. And the number of people that admitted openly that they were seeking it out because they were curious, because they'd heard it's the worst video that's ever circulated the internet. They wanted to see it for themselves. Yeah, there's definitely a lot of people that have that curiosity about them. And I know that many of them, when they see like 2 seconds of something like that, they never want to see anything again. They realise that this is really the most depraved thing that can be there, and no one needs to see that. I haven't seen it, but when I was in the courtroom, the judge had to go and watch it. And when he came back, he was just, white as a sheet.
After the break, how Daisy's destruction, the most notorious child abuse video ever made, was the undoing of Lux, the internet's most wanted man. His real identity is shocking, and our guest Eileen Ormsby talks about the surreal experience of looking at him in a courtroom. Thank you to our patrons, CJ Ryan, Demi's Revenge, Rebecca, Jenster, Jackie Fairbairn and Nikki Kelly. Victoria Police's Australia Task Force raided a house in a quiet cul-de-sac in South Morang on the outer fringes of Melbourne in August 2014. They were executing a search warrant based on intelligence collected by the FBI, Europol, Canadian Police and Queensland Police's Task Force Argos that suggested someone residing in the home was running an international online empire dealing in exploitation material of the most extreme category. They knew the household consisted of a family unit, 2 parents and a son and a daughter. Most police believed the father was the person they were looking for. He was a mechanic and a panel beater in his 50s. Sergeant Christine Stafford, however, went in with an interest in the son. Her pre-raid research told her that for a young person not long out of high school, he had a suspiciously scant online footprint. When asked to unlock his laptop during the raid, he refused, but he did hand over his phone, which was a mistake. Either he'd forgotten or thought he'd permanently deleted the 3 images of extreme child abuse stored in the cache. It was enough to charge him with possession of child exploitation material and take him into custody. Sergeant Christine Stafford spoke to Fairfax newspapers about that day.
Before obviously going in, we knew who Lux was, the user. He was considered the worst administrator of some of the worst websites in the world at the time. So we knew who the user was, we just had to make the connection to that Lux was Matthew Graham. When I first saw him on the day that we served the warrant, I was surprised by his confidence, that he was quite calm in that environment. In his mind, I can't imagine how that would have been going, him thinking, have they got me? Because obviously there's a bit of bluff. What we've got, what we don't have, not all our cards are played at the time. The level of and the type of content that he was dealing with was considered the worst in the world by FBI, by Europol. It was hardcore, hurtcore material. So torture and abuse of babies, mainly through to I think about 12. He was surprising when it got to the interview how candid and open he was to talk about that level of depravity, that it didn't flinch, it just rolled off his tongue what he was talking about. It was staggering to think that the FBI and Europol are all chasing Lux. Who is he? Where is he? And lo and behold, he's here. And he's a 21-year-old.
The most wanted trafficker of child exploitation material in the world was Melbourne University student Matthew David Graham, who lived at home with his parents and his sister and ran his empire from his childhood bedroom.
The person you were talking about, Lux, who owned what was considered the most heinous site ever to existed at the time, hurt to the core. What he did have was the need for people to look up to him and to think that he was someone special. And the only way he could do that was providing people with the most extreme videos, the most extreme material of anybody on the dark web. So most of the people on the dark web, hated him and reviled him, but there was this small subset that just thought he was like a god. Like Daisy's Destruction. It's the worst video that's ever circulated the internet. I haven't seen it, but when I was in the courtroom, the judge had to go and watch it. And when he came back, he was just, white as a sheet.
In the book, you talked about the argument that went on in the case between the prosecution and the defence. And the prosecution was fighting very hard for the judge to view the material. And the judge was saying, look, I don't think I need to. I get it. A defence was saying, he gets it. I don't think he needs to. And prosecution was saying, no, I think he does, because it's, it's very serious material that this Lux character has fought, and he fought really hard to get it on his site. He really wanted it on his site. Meanwhile, the man in question, Lux, in inverted commas, was sobbing at the back of the court, you wrote. What a fascinating situation.
Yeah, well, the whole thing was horribly tragic. His family were there.
God.
His mother and his father and his sister. And they had no idea. They genuinely had no idea what was going on under their nose. And anyone that's got a teenage boy knows that they lock themselves in their room and you have no idea what they're doing on the internet. When he started, I think he was about 17, 18. He was only very young. So he was 22 by the time he got to court, and he was very much your typical friendless, unpopular teen. And his parents had tried to get help for him over the years. And, it was an absolutely horrifying thing, especially to just watch his father sit there, a broken man, just, could not believe what he was hearing come out in the evidence. There's 3 days of this evidence going on, and it was very detailed evidence of exactly what you could find on this site. And, it was traumatic for all involved.
What sort of sentence did he cop after all of that?
He got 17 years.
I can't imagine he was very well equipped for prison, by the way, this young man.
No. I'd be surprised if he survives prison. He didn't look like the sort that was well equipped for prison. I'm assuming that he would go to a special one that houses child abusers. But even then...
They're not nice either.
Yeah.
From what I've heard.
It's the one place where law enforcement actually works together worldwide. There's been other sites as well that are larger on scale, not as violent, but larger on scale. And they have used some very controversial tactics including one where they took over. So they busted the guy that was running one of these sites. I can never remember if it's Child's Play or Playpen. It was one of those two. And they busted the guy, and then they took over that site and ran it for a year. The reason they did that was because they didn't really want the guy that's running the site. They want the people that are abusing the children. And in order to catch those people, there's law enforcement officers whose job it is to sit down and watch these videos frame by frame by frame to see if they can see anything in the background, anything in the house that, might identify who the child is, where they are in the world, who the perpetrator is, and to find them. Like there was another Australian guy that got recognised by a freckle on his finger in one of these sites, and just people piecing together all this stuff and then tracking down the actual perpetrators, the people that are actually carrying out the abuse on these children. And yeah, they all they work together really well, and a lot of it's led out of Queensland. Actually, these worldwide task forces are actually led out of Queensland. Australia's considered the gold standard to a certain extent.
Yes, and actually I read in your book, amazingly, the little girl from Daisy's Destruction, who was about, I think, 18 months old in that video, she was located. Yeah, well, so she was located. So, a lot of people think that Daisy's Destruction is a snuff film, which it's not, because Daisy did survive it, albeit with horrendous injuries that she'll carry through her life. So she was saved and put into care. However, there was the person that produced Daisy's Destruction. He was another Australian guy living in the Philippines called Peter Scully. He produced a lot of these films, and there was the remains of a 12-year-old girl found in his house that he had buried. So there's rumours, of course, that her death is on film, but nobody has found that particular film. I feel like Australian men are overrepresented with child producers of child exploitation material.
They seem to be. They really seem to be. Maybe it's because we take more notice because we're Australian, but certainly on this whole dark website, like Australians are overrepresented in general, especially in the drug buying. So per capita, we're very high, and that's mainly because of our borders, and it's much harder and more expensive to get drugs here and generally, so much easier to get them in the mail. But also, on the child predator side of things, the child abuse sites, we seem to be overrepresented in maybe not the users, but the ones that are doing the producing and the websites themselves. And so now certainly the drug side of things are actually moving off the dark web into apps now, encrypted apps. There's something called Televend, which uses the Telegram app, and you can go and find dealers through that now. So it is evolving all the time, and the great big point-and-click drugs markets, I think, are on the way down. There's not as many of them as there used to be. They're still there, and there's hundreds of millions of dollars to be made. The other issue is Bitcoin. So people thought that Bitcoin was anonymous, and it's actually the complete opposite. As in every single transaction that's ever been made in Bitcoin, anyone can go and see that. Anyone can go and look at it on the blockchain, which means that the only thing is, you don't know who's either side of that transaction. But once law enforcement knows who's on one side of that transaction, there's technology now that can trace that Bitcoin all the way until it gets cashed out by somebody, and then there's a human being picking it up on that other end. So there's a lot of people that have been brought undone by their Bitcoin transactions. So the dark web's now moving to another cryptocurrency called Monero because of that. The traceability of Bitcoin is actually still getting people now from back in the Silk Road days. So people that were vendors back then, they would have made a mistake with their Bitcoin address, and they're still getting caught now.
If you would like to talk to someone about online exploitation, you can call Crime Stoppers on 1800 333 000 or go to crimestoppers.com.au. Thank you to our guest Eileen Ormsby. There's a link in the show notes to Eileen's website where you can buy all of her books on the dark web. There are also links to buy tickets to our live shows, including our upcoming Melbourne Podcast Festival show, featuring behind-the-scenes footage from the Victorian Institute of Forensic Medicine on the big screen at the Jam Factory Cinema. Thank you to our patrons Fiona Hughes, Kathleen Williams, Ruby Callanan, Gail P., Sam Dobbin and Ruth. And thank you for downloading this episode of Australian True Crime. We'll be back next week.
This has been another Smartfella production in conjunction with the Acast Creator Network.